Yeah, we have a very special guest in the house today. Could you do me a favor and introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Jennifer Charlene Toon.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for joining us today. And you have a long journey that took you to get to the point you are today. And I'm very interested in hearing hearing that story. So if you could start from the beginning, how was your life growing up?
Oh boy. So growing up, I grew up in rural East Texas, Kilgore, Longview, Tyler area. Very, very rural part of Texas. Pretty middle class family, Southern Baptist, very strict religious community. But a pretty average family. I did well in school. I suffered from some mental health conditions and some childhood trauma, and I like cats and basketball. And I hope nobody in your audience is judging me for the Taylor Swift on the back wall. But I was an average little girl, and as I got older, a lot of my problems with mental health began to manifest pretty quickly by the time I turned 11 or 12.
Damn.
And I was about 15 when I committed my first offense. It was pretty shocking for the community and my family. I suffered in silence for a long time with those inner demons, mental health conditions. And so I was tried under what's called determinate sentencing laws. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, with Texas law, but it means that I was given an adult sentence that was suspended until I was about 18. And so then I go in front of the judge, and he decides if I go back to the Texas Youth Commission, which is now called the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, or I go to the adult prison, Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and finish that adult sentence. So I was given 20 years. And I was transferred to the Texas Youth Commission, which I'm sure, you might agree, and some of your guests in the past might agree, is that folks don't understand how ugly and dangerous a place that youth facilities are, especially vulnerable girls who come in there with a lot of trauma to begin with, who were preyed upon by staff. I was in a facility in West Texas that was actually run by a private prison and a for-profit prison. And there was
For
not.
juveniles?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was actually Wackenhut, which is now the GEO company. And being out in West Texas, there just wasn't a lot of oversight by the state. And it was a horrible, horrible place. And people ask me, when you think about all the time you did in prison, what was your worst time? And by far, hands down, was the 2 years that I spent in the Texas Youth Commission. It was just the stuff of nightmares. I still panic and break out in a cold sweats when I think about those 2 years.
Damn. Now, being that it's a private prison, and it's for youth, how ill-equipped were the staff to deal with the different youth that they walk through there? Because there's youth that are dealing with trauma, anger, pain. There's a lot going on. How ill-equipped were they to deal with that?
Oh, completely terrible. I mean, this was in the 90s, and I don't know if your viewers are familiar with the early 90s sentencing laws just in general
Yeah.
that believed the super predator theory, which was that children that commit violent crimes, they're just soulless. I had a psychiatrist, a state psychiatrist, told me, Miss Toon, some children are just born without a soul, indicating that I didn't have one. And I was so desperate to try to get the help that I needed. And at this facility, being a private contract, they're oriented about cost. So everything they could do to cut cost and save money, they did, whether it was our food, our clothes, background checks for staff. The entire unit was just rife with violence and sexual abuse from the guards, not really with one another, but it was terrible. We only had one person from the actual state who had an office there that was supposed to be monitoring everything. And, you can imagine he didn't really do much, but we did file a lawsuit later, and got quite a bit of a settlement from it because it was just that egregious. And if you look at Texas's history with their juvenile justice stuff, it is atrocious. It's atrocious, and we still have scandals and deep issues within the juvenile system.
Yeah, yeah. I've interviewed Around the Way TV, and the way he explained it to me was very confusing. Like I was really confused with how they do things in Texas when it comes to youth, because it seems like they could just throw anybody there, and it's like there is no real like sentencing there. And some if you're like you said, you had a suspended sentence where you could be tried as an adult. It's like everything's kind of up in the air. Like we'll see what happens. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, it's like, whoa, that's real uncertain. Because I know, not that California is great when it comes to juvenile justice. Believe me, it's not. But when we were there, we knew, like, okay, I'm being tried as a juvenile. I'm going to do my time as a juvenile. Even if I become an adult, it's still a juvenile offense,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or you got tried as an adult and you go to a juvenile facility, they know that you are an adult offender. Where in your guys' case, seems like even minor crimes, petty crimes, you can be in the Texas Youth Commission, and it's crazy because it's like, whoa, you have people in there, and you don't really. It just seems really scrambled to me when it was described to me. Is that pretty accurate?
Oh yeah, and especially like the kids that would come in, and even to this day, if they don't have determinate sentencing, which is the more serious offenses, they're committed for lower level offenses. You know, if they do well, they get paroled, and they're on people call it baby parole, but you, I mean, depending on what you did in there and just how angry you make the staff, I mean, they can file for charges for you to be tried for an adult for an assault in there, and extend, even if you're not participating as well as they think you should, they can continue to extend the original sentence. And it's this very, like you said, like this feeling of, I don't know what's fixing to happen to me. You feel so overwhelmed and lost in the system. As a kid, that I was at a hearing, and as part of my work that I do, I was at a hearing talking about youth and health and safety, and the juvenile department was testifying about, oh, we need trauma informed care and all this wonderful stuff. And I was just like, I was on my Twitter, I was like, I can't sit here and listen to the same agency that still 20, 30 years later, you see the same reports of abuse and trauma and uses of force and, victimizing, sexually abusing kids, to sit here and talk about, we want to provide the services while at the same time still traumatizing children that are put in our care, children that are often don't have family support, who are vulnerable. So I was super glad when I finally had my hearing when I was 18. It was kind of a mixed emotion, right? I was so relieved not to have to go back to that facility, but at the same time, the judge was like, you're going to prison. And part of that was a recommendation from that facility to send me to prison, because I had been smuggling out letters to news media, to attorneys, because they would stop our mail, they would lock us in our rooms, they would take all of our clothes and bedding and lock us in our rooms for days at a time, only giving us water, slipping tissue under the door, turning off the plumbing.
Damn.
And so I had an advocate's heart back then, and I had been threatened several times with charges of creating a riot just because I got girls to write grievances about not getting hygiene products, which that is a whole nother terrible experience. And so it was a lot of retaliation against the facility when they suggested and recommended to the judge that I would be better served therapeutically if I went to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. They have all these wonderful programs, so I would continue to get therapy.
Yeah.
And that is a bold-faced lie, especially, when I was 18 entering TDCJ. So I was relieved, but at the same time scared and, just really uncertain about my future, because when they transferred me to state prison, I was still looking at 8 years before I could see parole. And we all know how difficult it is to make parole on your first time. So the potential of looking at 18 more years in the system was really, really difficult. And my first year in prison, I didn't eat much. I slept a lot. It was really hard on me. But I picked up later on, becoming institutionalized, living the day to day life in there.
Yeah.
And I got my degree. I'd finished my high school diploma and got my college degree, and started focusing on things that just make it feel like you're living in a community, a dangerous one, but at least one that kind of, especially for women, prison feels very like a very mean, dangerous campus, like a very mean college campus. Certainly, we had our physical violence, but it's just a little bit different experience than the men.
Damn. Speaking of that, when you were in the juvenile system, was it co-ed or was it a strictly female facility?
Our reception facility, which is in Brownwood, or at the time it was in Brownwood, was co-ed. And so they had built a separate facility just for the girls. This was the first all-female facility, because they were like, well, girls have different needs, and let's. When they had the co-ed facility, there was also another one at Giddings, where they had more of the capital offender programs, a little bit more serious charges. You can imagine guys and girls, teenagers together, often doing what they do and getting in trouble, and also filing lawsuits that they could get married. And so the state decided, in the best interest of safety, to move into separate facilities.
So your institution is an all female institution and it's a private institution. That's really really messed up because, like they said, that there is a difference when it comes to needs for growing boys and growing girls. I will admit that, but I don't know if a private facility that's focused on cutting cost. It's not that I don't know. I do know that that they'll be able to meet those needs
Right.
because like that's crazy. And like you said, there's probably hygiene issues there. They don't care, right? They don't care what's going on monthly or what's going on psychologically or the fights. How was the violence in there? Because I would imagine that people are really fed up and angry, and what's going on around them, and they feel powerless, so they're gonna try to take that aggression out on somebody else.
Uh, it's interesting that we had four major dorms, and three of those dorms were for like girls that were there for lower level offensive, and then we had C dorm, which was with all the capital offensive, all the serious charges, the determinate sentencing, and the other dorms seemed to be always live with action. Like the girls were, burning stuff down, catching stuff on fire, what they could get their hands on. They would fight a lot. There was just a lot of chaos in those dorms. But I think maybe because we were older girls and we had this threat of state prison over our heads, that we really had a level of maturity that the other girls didn't. And I think the staff, because the other dorms were younger girls, we're talking 10, 11,
Yeah.
they they victimized them in ways that, I'm not saying they couldn't get away with that with us, but we were just a little bit more harder, and less vulnerable, even though we still were.
Yeah. And predators are gonna always go for the easiest route. Motherfuckers, man. So you get to state or to state prison, the Texas prison. How was that different than the youth facilities?
It, well, one way that was very different and very, very terrible is that Texas prisons don't have air conditioning,
Oh,
and
I
it
heard it's
is
hot out there too.
hot as hell. People die of the heat.
Oh,
It's amazing that you can't leave a dog or a cat in your car during the summer, but we can leave human beings in cages. So many people die of the heat in Texas prisons. The lawsuit that was filed, it was originated from a gentleman that died in his cell because it was so hot. Um, that when they finally came to extract him, because he was laying on the floor, because you throw water down on the floor so you can just lay there, that all of that had evaporated. He had passed, and the pieces of his skin were left on the cement when they pulled him up.
Oh,
That is how hot it gets in Texas prisons. So that was the first thing I noticed immediately. But I felt safer there than I did in the youth commission, because even those staff, state prison guards, are still nasty and abusive. It was a different type. There was more accountability. There was more transparency. It wasn't, there was better training. So in that regard, I felt a lot safer with the staff. With the other women, it was a little bit different of a dynamic. There wasn't as much chaos, but the internal politics of a women's prison. I tell people Orange is the New Black is very Hollywood, but in terms of relationships and the constant intrigue and people trying to cross each other out, like that paranoia, that was very real, and that took a while to get used to and to understand. You piss this girl off, girl, she works for the captain, and she is going, oh my God, like she's going to make your life a living nightmare. In learning the hierarchy and, who you get good in with. And I'm sure that happens at men's facilities too, but it was just something very new for me, because at the youth facility, we kind of all, I guess we were just trying to survive daily the staff assaults, that we really stuck together in a different way.
yeah. And one thing I heard about women's prisons that are different is like in most male prisons that I heard of is there's kind of like a structure, a structure when you're there, and it's like, oh, you roll with these guys, you roll with these guys, and it's like it's kind of set out for you. Where I heard a lot of female prisons are more like loose affiliations of structured that way, and so I would imagine that that could be more chaotic at times because you don't really have too many people to answer to, like other places. It's like, oh wow, everybody knows in this state or these facilities you have to answer to somebody, right? But
Mhm.
is it not? As I heard, it's not the same in most female prisons. Is that the case in Texas?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I can't even, what, gosh, I was there almost 20 years. I don't, never, there was never a gang. You know what I mean? There was
Yeah.
never, there are racial tensions, but in terms of being segregated among ourselves, among that doesn't exist. There are no gangs. There is no, we base our grouping on like creating families,
Hmm.
and that could be made up of all kinds of different, racial backgrounds. And again, like there is no gang association. So every every time you transferred to another unit, again, there's this hierarchy of which women you need to know run the unit in that way. And it's not like a gang thing, it's individual
Yeah.
people who you have to get on their good side. Like, oh, this is Karen, she's the white girl that runs the chapel. Don't cross her, because then you're not going to get your services or whatever. But if you need to get this and this, you get in good with her, and her close knit friends. But certainly not like gang stuff at men's facilities at all.
The thing, like I know you said, Orange is the New Black is kind of, well, not kind of, but it's very Hollywood. But a lot of those dynamics where it's like Red who ran the kitchen.
Right.
uh,
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, that's a trip. That's very interesting. So if, like, let's say if you were to cross somebody like that, because hey, attitudes, like it's hot as fuck. Like you said, it's hot. Attitudes are going back and forth, and you're like, I don't give a fuck. Like, what happens? What are the consequences of crossing someone like that? Uh, like I say with the chapel services, you could just say, ah, fuck it, I'm not going to church or whatever. But if it's something like laundry or food, like what happens? What kind of retaliation or consequences do you face if you were to do that?
Oh gosh, there's so many, right? There's so many, and the ways that we retaliate against each other are very different. Which, I mean, I think we men and women share a lot of stuff, but
Yeah.
to the severity of it. So, if it's someone in, she's the food service clerk, She might be able to do something to your food, but we're talking more on like a day-to-day personal level, like
Okay.
somebody stashes something in your cubicle, somebody rats you out that you've got contraband, or they steal your address to your dude, and start writing him and say, hey, she's got a girlfriend and this is her name. There are all these dirty, underhanded ways
Damn.
of getting back at each other, and it creates this paranoia that, like, oh man, like, I got to be careful of her because she might be smiling in my face right now, but I hurt her feelings about, I said, I didn't say her baby was cute in her photograph that she showed everybody, and she's bipolar or whatever her issues are, and she's going to tell the officer when maybe I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing against the rules, and the second she sees me, she's going to run me in to the staff member, to the guard. So
That,
I
that's a,
mean, yeah,
that's a trip because it's not like, oh, I can't break this rule or I'm getting stabbed up. It's more like you have to deal with every individual differently.
yes.
It's not like we all know like this is what respect is. We all have a understanding of what respect is. It's like, no, this person wants to be treated this way, and this person wants to be treated this way. And if they're having an off day, then man, that must be a lot to deal with for years at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm not trying to characterize women as being overly emotional and moody, but we are. And so it just depends on the day. Like, what we call a person that is kind of volatile like this, sometimey. It's like, oh girl, she's real sometimey. It's like one day she like you, the next day I hate you, and you didn't invite her to the spread that y'all were having, and she didn't get a burrito, and now she's just run everybody in the doorman for having extra clothes. Or and I like to point out too that women's contraband, at least in the facilities I've been in, is not like men's contraband. It's really not. I never really saw drugs, and certainly not cell phones, which is becoming kind of mute now that they've got tablets. But it wasn't. It was never that type of serious contraband. I think sometimes it was like razor blades because they'd pop them out of their razors. But for the most part, it's just petty shit all the time that women constantly run each other in for. And it's like, if you did that at a men's facility, you may lose your life. And women aren't like that. They just will continue to one up each other. They have no problem snitching on one another. They just do it all the time. It's just a way of life there.
Yeah.
I
That's
mean, unless you had that internal, like, I'm not going to do that. I so I think the worst thing I did was when I worked commissary and the girl that came to the window had stolen my girlfriend. So I smashed up her chips and licked the top of her ice
fucked
cream.
up. That's fucked
Um, I never ran people into staff because I always felt like that was crossing the line. I always felt like we should be able to handle our problems amongst each other.
And speaking of contraband, my wife, she pointed out stuff, and it's kind of crazy. Well, she's never been to jail, but she just pointed out stuff out here that I found interesting. One of them being that there's taxes on things like tampons and stuff like that, but there's certain, like, say Viagra, there's no taxes. I just thought that was interesting, right? Like, whoa, like it's something that as a man, like I never noticed it because
Hmm.
that's something that I had to see, right? I basically coming from a place of privilege where I didn't have to deal with that, so I never noticed it. But her, she notices it, right? Because
Right.
she has, yeah. So when it comes to contraband, were there certain things that they considered, maybe the staff would consider a luxury that you guys thought were maybe more of a necessity, and they seen that as contraband, or was everything pretty straightforward in there?
Well, the interesting thing that data shows that inequality pretty clearly, especially in terms of sentencing and disciplinary while you're incarcerated, is that women in Texas, and I think nationally, and I need to find the article for you. You might enjoy it, find it enlightening. I think it was through PBS or something. But so a woman has let's use contraband, because there's major and minor cases, and those things can be graded depending on the captain or whatever. So I've got a contraband case because I've got 7 tampons and I'm only supposed to have 6, right? So that could go either way. It could be a minor disciplinary case. It could be major. Just depends on the whim of the captain.
Mhm.
Well, the captain's going to say, "Oh, it's a major case. I'm going to prove that these women, they're always thinking they, above, just
Yeah.
really strict, petty ways they interacted with us." So I get a major case for that. And I lose my visitation with my kids and my husband and my mom. I lose my phone privilege, like all the things that are supportive for rehabilitation, right? So then you have a guy that has a tattoo gun that he's made out of his fan, or maybe even a small shank. Could be graded minor or major. Well, their captain's like, "Oh, that's a minor case, like, just whatever." And he gets maybe 10 days loss of rec. And that is real. And that happens all the time in the system. And it's infuriating. It's a type of, I call it like a type of psychological abuse from the state against women. This really petty, nitpicking, like just constant torture about the smallest, stupidest stuff. And to watch the officers berate us and harass us and terrorize us over an extra tampon, it's mind-boggling. It's like,
Yeah.
when we used to say this, I know the men don't have to put up with it. I know they would never put up with this. The staff would be too terrified to pull this kind of petty stuff on them. But women live with such a fear of retaliation, of not being able to see their kids. And I don't mean to say that men, don't want to see their children, but with women, it's so deep rooted to get them to resist or to buck the system in any way.
Yeah. No, and no, I completely understand that. My dad always told me, um, like, son, if you ever get busted, best thing to do is not think about the outside. So anything you have out there, leave it out there. So,
Hmm.
and I know, like, if for a mother, that's not an option. You can't just say, "I can't think about my kids." For the most part,
Hmm.
yeah, for the most part, you can't say like, "I'm not gonna think about the kids." Like, nah, it's like you're gonna have to. You mean and so yeah, they that's sad that the staff can hold that over your head, hold your motherhood over your head, like, oh, and it's kind of crazy because one could argue that they're doing it because the not that they're less violence, but the violence in a women's facility is a lot different than the violence in a man's facility, and in terms of escalation, especially, right?
Hmm.
Like it could really escalate. So they're kind of penalizing you guys for having not as violent outburst. It seems,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
which is
It
really
That's
sad.
a perfect point that you bring up, because we've always tried to figure out, like, why do they do us like that? And I think part of it is the psychological uh, terror of that. But I think the other part of it is that staff get bored, and it's like they have nothing else. They really don't. They obsess on um, girl on girl relationships, if that's happening. It's just an absolute obsession for them. Or, our property, because that's all we have are our relationships and the little bit of property we have. And because we don't fight like that. Now, hobby unit, which is a very specific unit that all of us hate, in terms of condition, it is closer to a men's facility than the rest of them. It is pretty violent, all the way around. But for the most part, for the women, the staff have nothing else to focus on but those petty things.
How frustrating was that also um that they try to, and I never understood this, but that they try to crack down on relationships in there, right? Like, because to me, just as a like human interaction, right? Um, uh, like, why is it their business? Like, they already took away your freedom. They already control your movement. Why do they need to control that aspect of your life? How frustrating was it for them to constantly be on that and be obsessed with it? And did it seem like a lot of it came from their view of morality?
Oh yeah. Like yeah, like I think that is what it's rooted in. Because now they'll say it's because the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and we just have to be so on top of anything that remotely looks like it. We don't know if y'all are sexually acting out, or if you're, doing something physically affectionate. There's no way for us to determine if you're being coerced or whatever. And I mean, I know there's real good intent in that federal law, but I think sometimes the guards use that as a way to further enhance their obsession with, because this goes way back even before PREA ever existed.
Mhm.
And I think it's the cultural idea of what morality is, and their views on that anyway. But it also to that thing that prison staff, I don't that they exude, that we don't deserve uh, basic things.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, like this is a luxury. Like how dare you? A lot of times you'll hear the guards say that, whether it's relationships or going to college. I don't get to do that. Like, why do you get to be in prison and be happy? And why do you get to be in prison and go to school? And it's like, honey, you need to really reevaluate your goals for your own life. Like, if you're jealous of a prisoner, something is deeply wrong with you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure. Because you got to go home. It's like, understand that you got to go home nightly. Why are you tripping on us?
yeah, right. Like, why does it upset you so badly that I'm sitting here with this other woman and laughing and having a good time, and you may even be assuming that it's a romantic relationship, because quite frankly, I know the '70s films back in the exploitation era of of filmmaking, with all the raunchy women's prison movies like Caged Heat, and there's all this, there is a mythology about women in prison, right, in terms of sexuality and sex. Most of that is not true. It's not. It's not a crazed orgy. It's not
Yeah.
happening like that. It's just relationships. It's companionship. It's you know. There's a saying that we have is gay for the state, and it's women that this is not their orientation. It's just we all crave affection and companionship, and it just drove the guards absolutely nuts.
Well, what's always been interesting to me, and I even noticed it while I was busted. I was like, "What the fuck?" Is the fact that it seems like they're trying to stomp out your humanity little by little. It
Hmm.
always seems like that. Like, and I know it wasn't all staff, but it was a majority of these motherfuckers that were just like real sadistic with the way they acted, and I always tripped out because I knew I was going home one day, and I was like, "Damn, they're pissing off a lot of people that are gonna go home." So I always wonder what was the like why they needed to punish people who are already being punished that we're gonna go home one day. That always interested me. Like you're gonna put monsters out there. You're creating monsters. What do you think?
Oh no, I agree with you, and that's something with the work that I do that we tell legislators all the time. Like, you have a system that is, just like you said, stomping out people's humanity. I'm barely holding on to it during the time that I'm incarcerated, and it may have been in a very fragile state when I got there in the first place. And you want me to come back out and reintegrate into society after you have treated me less than a caged dog? And it's like, how does that make sense? Like, why would I care about a society when they have clearly shown me that they don't care that I die, that it's 120 degrees in this cell, or that we're trapped in here with COVID with no ways to protect ourselves, or we're ankle deep in sewage? The conditions of confinement in Texas prisons are so bad that there was a case recently of a gentleman, I believe that he was in either in Ireland or Scotland, that he was to be, extradited. And the courts ruled that since he was to be extradited back to Texas to go to a Texas prison, that they would not extradite him. That is how bad international law looks at the humanity crisis in Texas prisons regarding conditions. They're like, oh no, that we're not going to send him back. And those prisons are like that because it violates international standards of human decency.
Dang.
It's I don't get it. I don't understand how it makes sense to treat us like less than human and then expect us to behave in all the compassionate ways that fully humans do.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, because like they're adding to the trauma, they're adding to that, and like you said, people are these are gonna we're gonna people are gonna get out. These are gonna
Mm-hmm.
be your next door neighbors. These are gonna be people looking for jobs. Why do you want the worst in people to come out? Why not just rehabilitate them? And people might make the argument, well, it doesn't work for everybody. Yeah, it might not work for everybody. There might be some people that come out and commit crimes even after going through the rehabilitation process, but it's better than having creating people who don't know any other way and the only language they know how to speak is violence. And like it's better than having that and having, like you said, you had the opportunity to get education in there. How beneficial was that to you?
It was, I mean, it was really beneficial. So when I got my associate's degree, and I also trained as a peer health educator. When I got out, when I finally did make parole after serving half of my 20, um, I was able to, I had the discipline of school. I understood, what it was like to go to college. It was really a safe haven while I was there to feel like a normal person because our professors treated us like people. And, I went on to go to the University of Houston. I got a great job at a nonprofit training folks who were in prison to be health educators. Uh, but when the state talks about rehabilitation, they really think they're doing a great job. You can't get them to admit
So Texas
that.
does?
Oh yeah, they don't admit to any
Think
of that
Texas is
stuff.
one of the like most punitive places that I've heard of when it comes to like it seems like they're way more interested in punishment than rehabilitation.
Oh yeah, I mean because that's the culture, and it's interesting. My friend Carrie Blakinger, she writes for the Marshall Project, which is an organization that only reports on prisons, and she did kind of an investigative report about Texas field work. So that was us working in the fields. We called it the hoe squad, and you had the garden hoe that we called an Aggie, and you step in time in cadence, and you chop very old school, very plantation like, down to the guard who is sitting on the horse with the shotgun and the big cowboy hat, screaming at, calling us gals and calling the guy grown men boys. And it just transports you back to the 1800s. It really does. And so they justify having field squads for, crops and growing things so they can feed the units and then sell the surplus to get money or whatever. And over the past several years, field operations actually lost money and cost the state quite a bit. And we were talking about it, and she said, well, why do you think TDCJ continues to do that? I said, because it is deeply rooted in their culture.
Mhm.
Field squad, host squad work, it allows them to also transport back to the 1800s where they get to be the boss man on the horse, with the shotgun. Um, it's I mean, it exemplifies that punitive idea that you were talking about with Texas because it is so much focused as a state that claims a deep religious faith. They don't exemplify that in terms of mercy or compassion or rehabilitation. It is a deep focus on punitive and punishment.
Damn. What's crazy is that I know this isn't a question you could answer, but I wonder how fucking insecure these people have to be to find like to get that kind of like that kind of a power trip and that kind of like a reward in themselves of acting like that, sitting up there. I don't think I can comfortably sit on a horse with a shotgun over my shoulder while people are working right there. And just yeah, I don't think I honestly I wouldn't feel comfortable with that.
Who would? What healthy person would? And and I hate to characterize all the field officers bosses, because we had to call them boss. Even though secret code for that amongst us that they didn't realize is that spells son of a bitch backwards. But they wanted to be called boss man and
Or
boss.
they wanted
Oh,
two S's. It's stupid son of a
yeah,
bitch.
yeah. Um, it just it, it's just mind boggling that the state of Texas still lives in this punitive idea of justice. It's not financially beneficial. It doesn't keep the community safe. There are so many other things that work, but they're deemed as liberal or soft on crime and luxuries, and so they shy away from that and stay grounded in this very ancient good old boy system.
Damn. So after 10 years, you're able to go home.
Yeah, it was pretty exciting.
How old were you at that point?
I was 25.
25. So that's young to have just gotten out for doing 10 years. Um,
Yeah.
h- how different was the world from when you left it?
So very different. I remember that, I had money left over from that lawsuit that I mentioned earlier. So I was able to, thank God was living at my parents' house, and I was able to buy a car outright and enrolled into college pretty quickly. So I felt very much like a college student age. But I also felt I had so much anxiety,
Mhm.
because that was not treated when I was in TDCJ. And of course, compounded by the trauma and the abuse that I experienced in the system. But, I kind of stuffed that inside the best I could. But I remember pulling up to the gas station, and I didn't know how to operate the pump. And I
Mhm.
was so embarrassed. I didn't want to ask anybody. So I remember just standing there crying. I just had tears rolling down my face. I was panicked. I didn't know what to do. So I finally went into the gas station and I told the guy, I said, I think that pump is broke. And he was like, no. I said, well, I can't get it to turn on. He was like, did you put your debit card in there? And I was like, I didn't know what a debit card was. And I was like, no, I have cash. He goes, okay, well, you pay me the cash. And then I turned the pump on. And I was like, what? Like, why would
Yeah.
they do that? And then, someone had to explain, Jennifer, because it got so bad that people would fill up and drive off. And when I was younger, you just filled up your tank and went inside and paid for it. And people just don't do that anymore. But there were so many things about technology that were just DVDs had come out, and I just found that utterly fascinating. I grew up on cassettes and VHS, but I picked up on it pretty quickly, especially when I was going to college.
Yeah, I think you were fortunate enough to get out at that right age, right? And
Yeah.
especially at the right time where things were changing, so you get to adapt. Maybe another 5, 6 years, you'd have been really left behind because that'd have been a lot for you to take in. So,
Yeah.
but I wanted to ask is, how similar? I know they're very, very different, but how similar were the feels of when it comes to like a community sense of um like college like a college space and the prison space. Did you feel kind of, was that an easier transition because there's a lot of people there and there's a lot going on, you have movements, like certain movements you have to make at certain times? Did that kind of make the transition a little easier for you, or was that because there were so many people that make it a lot more difficult?
I think it made it easier because I knew routine.
Yeah.
And, but I mean, I always had that because my dad is ex military. So we had a very structured, almost too structured life. But I think as much as I was excited about being free and being in college, I still felt I didn't socialize a lot. I just focused on class because I felt like people would know, like I'm different, like there's something wrong with. I never felt like I fit in, and I
Mhm.
mean, I felt like that when I was younger, but especially when I came out from prison, it was like, oh my god, like if people knew, um, and it was really difficult in terms of that. Now, the school part of it and the schoolwork was I loved it. I was going to school to be a journalist, and but it made me very anxious. I developed a lot of social anxiety coming out of prison.
How did you go about, like, for the first couple of times, sharing your story with strangers or people that had just become friends, acquaintances that have become friends? How did you get to that level of comfortability?
Well, the first time I got out, I really kept it to myself as long as I could, as close as I could. When I moved to Houston to go to the University of Houston, and then I got a job training, health educators. People would ask me, "Well, this is an odd job to be in. Like, how did you get into like direct services for prisons?" And I'm like, because I was in prison. So I think having my job first helped.
Yeah.
But I remember my first romantic relationship. I was like, how am I going to? She never asked me like about my work. She never did. And then one day we were driving, she just laughed and she said, "Oh God, have you ever known anybody that's been like arrested?" Because I was having this conversation with my friend, and I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "Who?" I said, "Me." And she just kept driving. We drove almost to Galveston in total silence, and I was like, "Oh boy." And so then we drove back to her house, and then we went in like nothing ever happened. And a few nights later, we were laying there talking, and I we were talking about some personal stuff, and I ended up telling her, I was 15 and what had happened. And I said, "Look, if you're gone in the morning, it's been fun. You're sweet. I totally understand." And the next morning when I woke up, it was just a little creepy, her laying there just staring at me. But she was like, "I just wanted you to see that I'm still here." And I found that the people in my life that are not somehow already exposed to prison, once they got to know me, it never was an issue. People that didn't really know me and had just met me, we didn't really get to know each other after that they found out that. But allowing people time to know me and see my character really helped. And when I ended up back in prison the second time, from not having any type of mental health, when you pretend something doesn't exist and you just continue to stuff it at the back of your mind, and believing that you are self sufficient and I'll just handle this on my own, it led to very bad outcomes. But those same people stood by me the next 10 years that I was in prison, because I surely thought then, oh, well, they're going to think that I am intrinsically a bad person, like the psychiatrist said, you just don't have a soul,
Mhm.
because here I have done something else. And they never believed that, not even my parents. And I remember calling them from jail the second time, just crying. And I said, "Please, I'm so sorry. I don't want you to think that I'm a bad person, that I don't have a soul." And my dad was like, "What the hell are you talking about?" Jennifer, I really was, I was sad because I had just gotten used to you being home. I wish that you would have told us what was going on. So
How old were you at that time?
I was 30. So I'd only been out maybe 5 years. And, the second incarceration, now I'm not a kid. I think when I got arrested when I was a kid, I was just so freaked out and traumatized by what had happened. It was like it the I'm not saying the gravity of it didn't sink in, but just trying to survive every day never allowed me to fully let everything sink in. And that second incarceration, when I woke up in jail and knew that that door was not opening because I was still on parole,
Mhm.
I realized then how much was at stake and that I could possibly go to prison for years and never get out. And I had this wonderful life and this job and career and getting my degree, and I prayed in that cell that day, "Dear God, please help me find out what is wrong with me to finally fix it so this never happens again. Even though it might take years to get on the other side of that door again, I need to start the work now." And it was a difficult journey the next 10 years. I went to Mountain View in Gatesville. The Gatesville is the hub of the prison. It's the prison city. Like Huntsville is the prison city for the men. Gatesville is a wonderful name of a town, right? Gatesville is the hub for the women's prisons. And so I went to Mountain View, which is very high security, but very campus like. Women's death row is housed there, protective custody. The charges of the majority of the women who were there were far more serious, but, and maybe in your experience too, you know that people with big time are less chaotic and they're calmer and they just want to do their time. They want to go to their church services. They want to go to school. They want to live their day-to-day life. They don't want all that bullshit.
Yeah.
So I was so grateful for that. And it's one of the few units that have air conditioning. So trust me, I was praying, dear God, please have mercy on me and send me to Mountain View.
Yeah, when you got there, did they focus more on treatment because they were longer term offenders?
No. I mean, mental health treatment in Texas prisons is pretty nil to begin with. Programming typically tends to be more faith based. And, in some ways that can be good. But in other ways, if you're not that faith, then that kind of screws you. But I think the programming that was there allowed me, like the peer education program, I got to be a teacher again. I got to teach the other women about their bodies and their health and, about domestic abuse, working in the library, just doing basic programming things to just kind of help me, like self-help kind of stuff, but certainly not intensive mental health treatment. And what I had to do in terms of that was that I had to search back through my memory bank of what they diagnosed me with as a teenager, which I don't mind sharing that. It was borderline personality disorder. And pretty intense personality disorder. And suddenly it all began to make sense because I began reading. We do a lot of that in prison. We have to educate and heal ourselves. We can't wait on the state to do it.
Yeah.
So I just started accumulating all these books on this disorder that helped explain it and explain ways to cope. And I slowly started implementing those things that I was learning on my own, and my life improved. Like I got better, like my management with my emotions and relationships. I mean, it was profoundly different. And when I made parole, they did send me to what's called in therapeutic prison community, which is for substance abuse users. It's a 6 months program, but a lot of times they'll send people who have done a lot of time to that program because it's behavior modification, which I'm not a fan of. And it's what they tortured us with at the youth commission and manipulated us with. But I did receive good cognitive intervention therapy, like cognitive intervention and my own self-help education really changed my life.
That's dope. So would you say that that term was, even though you said it was 10 years, the same as the first? Did it feel faster or did it feel slower?
It felt far slower. It felt really slow. And I got denied parole about 8 times. I'd
Dang.
come up for parole because the second charge was non-aggravated. And I remember my attorney, and it's so weird, the disconnect from attorneys and court officials and DAs in terms of sentencing. He's
Mhm.
like, "Oh, you've got a non-aggravated 12-year sentence. You'll just do a turnaround." I said, "Nope, no way. That's not going to happen. I'm on parole." He was like, "Well, but it doesn't matter. You're eligible as soon as you get there because you've done a year in county." I said, "The state of Texas, the parole board is not going to parole me. Not the first time, not the second time, not the third time. They're going to wait. They're going to make me do almost that whole time." And they did.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that is because I would imagine the second term would be longer because the first one you're inexperienced in a lot of it, so it's just kind of like you said, you're in survival mode, so it's kind of just flying by. Well, not the 10 years flies by, but it's kind of just going by a lot faster than it would you expecting and knowing what's gonna happen. Then it's
Right.
like shit, man, like fuck, I have to do this all over again.
Yes. God, the feeling of, oh gosh, the I was dreading being transferred when I signed for my time. I was dreading being transferred back to Gatesville, because not only had I made my first parole the first time, and remember, I was working at that nonprofit in Houston training people how to be peer educators. I was going to these conferences in Gatesville. I was going back into the prisons. I had written for the state prison newspaper, and I have a very unusual last name, so people recognized me. And God, I was like, I can't bear the embarrassment, and not just the embarrassment, but the sheer disappointment and hurt that those other women are going to feel when they see me back in this white uniform. I can't, it crushed me. But amazingly, when I got there, women did recognize who I was. Not just my friends that I'd left there, but, Mountain View, I only knew just a handful of people. But those that had recognized me from, my writing or whatever, or going to conferences, they were excited to see me, and they were like, "Oh, you inspire me so much." And I'm like, "Are you crazy? You do realize I'm back in here with you." And my friend Shantae said something that really helped me do the rest of that sentence. And she was like, "Oh, honey, please." She said, "We all make mistakes. It just takes us a while. But if you did it once, you can do it again."
Yeah.
And that never left me. And I was like, "Well, fuck it." Like, Lord, let's get through it. I'll make the best of it. And even if I have to do this whole 12, which I almost did, um, I can do it. I can reestablish. It's just going to take time. And when I got out the second time, they put me on super intensive supervision, which is a two-way GPS monitor where you got to write out the schedule and don't deviate from it. And that was a nightmare. But this too shall pass. And
Yeah.
I successfully made it off that. And then last May, I finally, for the first time since I was 15, completed all supervision, and I'm free from the state of Texas's grasp.
No more tail. That's it.
That's it, man. Finally, I never thought I would see the day sometimes, but I finally made it through.
And it, so I understand that you were able to get back into like community work and you got into activism. Tell us a little bit about that. And we know like, based off the story, we know what led you there. But how did you get to that point?
So when I got out and I was on that monitor, I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't even go outside the house on the weekends. All I could do was go to I worked at Goodwill and Subway, and then I would come home. And I was so desperate to do what I felt God had led me to do, which was to share my story and work hard for the people on the inside. And so I was on Facebook, and technology had changed again. So I was relearning that. But I just started connecting to all these groups, discovering what organizations are working on, prison reform. And I just sent out emails, and I looked for opportunities to write and get published, because the writing in the prison newspaper is not digital, so I couldn't share that. So I started, taking that time that I was forced to be in my house to write, and I love to write. And just networking. And I got into a group called the Statewide Leadership Council, which is an advocacy group just for people who were formerly incarcerated. And through that, people referred me to some fellowships that I'm currently involved in. And I, I wound up in a job that works with disability right organization. And I focus on the intersection of mental health. And then I created my own group just for formerly incarcerated women. And it's been amazing that the freedom and the power of the work that we do. And I packed up my shit and took off towards Austin, which is the Mecca of Texas. There's so much here that's so alive, and did a lot of work in the last session, and looking forward to doing more.
Yeah, I understand there's a particular case that you're following right now. Could you tell us a little bit about that one?
Oh yeah, so that's Melissa Lucio. And for anybody that doesn't know about Melissa Lucio's case, she is a Latina who was charged with the death of her daughter, her toddler daughter, back in 2007. And there's a film on Hulu, and you can also rent it on YouTube. It's called "The State of Texas versus Melissa." And so Melissa has maintained her innocence for years. There was a lot of her case that her attorney, who directly after she received the death penalty, he got a job in the prosecutor's office,
Yeah.
and the prosecutor of her case was a man named Villalobos, who was also running for Congress. Turns out that he was accepting bribes. He was convicted of fraud and is now serving 13 years in the feds. And so that you have all this corruption in her case, and the interrogation that the Texas Rangers did, and you can see that in the film, is absolutely atrocious. The lies that they tell her, the way they bring a doll in and tell her, how did you discipline your child, and hit the doll harder. Don't you want to hit the doll harder? And so she's following their instructions, and of course they're using those clips during the trial. And she was also pregnant at the time, and they berate her. And this is a woman who has suffered deep domestic violence, a lot of sexual abuse, and her daughter had fallen down a flight of steps. And the medical examiner said, "Oh, this is the worst case of child abuse I've ever seen, with all the bruising, and she's got a bite mark on her." And come to find out, which she was never allowed to present because, again, her ineffective counsel, that the bruising on the baby's body came from a bleeding disorder from the head injury. He never called her other children. She has 14 children. They were living in deep poverty, and she was struggling with addiction. Now, she had some CPS cases, and it's never been disputed that Melissa was a struggling mother, but that doesn't make her a murderer. And it goes back to a lot of those stereotypes about what we believe, the standards that we hold women to, that we don't for men. Her husband at the time, her partner, was given 4 years, and she was given death. She was actually offered 30, and she said, "Absolutely not. I did not harm my child." And they said, "Okay, well, we got you. We'll just try you for death." And so we've been working very diligently to free Melissa Lucio. The Innocence Project, her attorneys are fighting diligently to try to get the death warrant withdrawn from the Cameron County District Attorney. And we had a hearing yesterday. The legislators, the Criminal Justice Reform Committee, called him to the hearing to answer some tough questions. And it was hard not for that whole room to not scream and start throwing stuff, and just to watch the legislators. We're talking conservative Republican legislators, their faces just turning red with rage, that this district attorney is, talking out of both sides of his mouth, and just being so disrespectful to the family, because her son was there. Her oldest son is leading the campaign, and his wife and her aunt, and just listening to him not value them as victims and as her family is just very troubling. So we're hoping to get the execution stopped. We're believing for that. It's scheduled for the 27th. And this has been a hard case, because when you have such a little baby, such a young victim, people do get extremely emotional. But we all know that you can't trust the state's narrative, and that innocent people do get charged with things that are based in science to show as an accident. Actually, 1 in 3 women who've been exonerated have been accused of harming their children. And it's interesting that if Melissa was of a different culture, if she had not been living in poverty, if we didn't have these biases towards addiction, I certainly think the outcome would have been very different.
Yeah.
So I implore anybody who's interested to go to freemelissalucio.org. It gives you all the resources. Watch the film, sign the petitions. We're waiting on the Board of Pardons and Paroles to make a recommendation to Governor Abbott. He cannot make a ruling until they make a recommendation. And then, of course, hopefully everybody put enough pressure on the DA to withdraw the warrant before the actual date.
Hopefully so. Yeah. And that story just, confirms what I always believe, and it's people's rights. You know, if you ever are accused of anything, I always say, you know, practice your Fifth Amendment right. You have the right to remain silent and use that right because they're trained to get confessions. They're
Hmm.
trained to get evidence for a prosecution. It doesn't matter if you are innocent or not. Their training is designed for them to get what they need for you to be prosecuted, right? So
Yeah.
it's like if they've been trained in that field and you haven't, how are you going to beat them by like playing along with what they say?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I'm not going to commit another crime in my life. Like that's not what I do these days.
Hmm.
Um, but if they were to ever like get me for something, even if I know I'm innocent, I'm not saying shit. Like fuck
Right.
no. I know what you guys are trying to do. Like hell nah.
Right.
You're not gonna get me with that shit. You know what I mean? Like I'll let my lawyer fucking talk this out with you guys because I'm not saying anything that you guys can use to incriminate me. And I think that should be something that we have to put out there so people it's not about being uncooperative, it's about protecting yourself, especially if you come from a community that they see as less than desirable.
Oh, absolutely. And, I know Melissa because I was at Mountain View and, they keep them very isolated. But we are able to have some small interaction with them, but any woman who is formerly incarcerated in the state of Texas, especially where I did my time, I mean, they're friends, they're close to me, they're dear to me, they're like family. And so this is very personal for me and the other women that are working in conjunction with the family on this. And when you watch the film and you watch the interrogation, you, as a woman that has experienced a lot of trauma and who knows many women who have, when you see her demeanor, that's what did it for me. I always believed Melissa was innocent, but really watching that, I was like, my God, you can see her dissociate. You can see her cower. You can see a woman that has deferred to abusive male figures since the time she was a little bitty girl. And you see that happening. And she claimed her innocence over 80 times. And what she finally said was, I'm responsible.
Yeah.
And as a mother, and I've had many women tell me, as a mother, that means ultimately this is my fault.
Yeah.
And you can't say that to Texas Rangers, but you're right. They're trained to get a confession. They don't give a damn, and they used a lot of those tactics that we know are lead to false confessions, which are, you know, if you did this, how would you have done it? And you can kind of see her looking for prompts from them. And it's just it's horrifying. And one of the legislators yesterday said, this case, a lot of times you'll have cases that exemplify a part of the system that is flawed. But
Yeah.
with Melissa's case, it is every part of the system that has failed her, whether it's education, the health system, the faith community, and certainly everything in the criminal justice system from the moment of her arrest to where she is now. And to watch to listen to some of the things that the DA said yesterday were just dumbfounding. And they pleaded with him, you have the legal authority to just withdraw it. Let's wait. Because the appellate court, he said, well, the appellate courts have ruled. Well, that's truth. Three-panel appellate court said that she deserves a new trial. She didn't get to present any of her evidence where all of her children said they saw the baby fall and they saw another sibling who was very mean to her and very abusive to her. And the appellate court, the three-panel, ruled that she deserves another trial. The state appealed to the whole appellate court, and 10-7 ruled that, based on EDPA, the federal regulations about how a death row person can file for relief. Based on those technicalities, they ruled against her. But they all agreed. But we do agree that she might be innocent, and all of the stuff that should be presented that are in this appeal could very well have influenced the jury. And now we have 5 juror members who have said, had I known all this, I would have never voted to give that woman death. It's just an absolutely, I have no other word but clusterfuck, and this woman's life is on the line.
Damn, that's the justice system for you.
Yeah.
Um,
Welcome to Texas.
yeah, and I know that they're real heavy on that death penalty over there, and I just like man, like it's nuts because I read certain things and I see like man, I think they said 4% of people who are sent to death and actually are killed, are executed, are innocent.
Hmm.
We're killing 4% of people for no reason. That's like I don't know. That doesn't sit well with me. I don't know. Maybe some people were like, well, what if you? The way I look at it is, would you want to be that 4%?
Right.
I wouldn't. Like, there's no way I want to die for something I didn't do. It's just it's a terrible terrible thing. But yeah. Before we wrap it up, is there anything else you wanted to add today?
Oh no, I'm just really excited to have a grown-up conversation about prison. I could talk about prison all day long. I'm just so deeply passionate as you are about, elevating our voices, and just being positive about it. I'd mentioned to you that sometimes some prison shows or podcasts, they're heavy on the war stories, and it's good to tell those stories, but there's a way that we do storytelling and advocacy, that shows the truth of the situation but offers solutions,
Yeah.
and real conversation. So that's why I reached out to you, because I was like, oh man, I really I really dig this guy. I hope he thinks I'm cool with my Taylor Swift poster in the background.
Tay Tay, Team Tay Tay, I got your back on that one. Don't worry. Yeah, well, I appreciate you joining us today. We're gonna put the link to your channel below, so if you guys want to check her out, make sure and click that link, hit subscribe. Appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing your story.
Well, definitely, thank you for having me.
No problem. And with much love to the Nasty crew, much love to all my Y babies, and with that, we out. Peace.